Iran now warning that Hezbollah will strike deeper inside Israel than ever before and target civilians following the assassination of Hezbollah's second in command. Israel's military confirmed earlier in the week that it carried out a strike in Lebanon's capital of Beirut, killing Fuad Shakur. He's the man believed to have been behind last weekend's attack in the Golan Heights that killed 12 children and injured 20 others. A spokesperson for Iran's permanent mission to the United Nations saying today that the Hezbollah terror group has limited itself to, quote, targeting primarily military objectives, but all of that is now out of the window. Do want to talk more about all of this and the latest developments there in the Middle East, so let's bring in Bill Raggio, a senior fellow and the editor of the Long War Journal at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today and help break it all down.
Thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Of course. Well, first off, I do want to ask you there about the comments that were made by Iran. It seems as though they do continue to say, this is what we're going to do. We're vowing revenge here, vowing revenge there. So is this kind of par for the course as far as that goes?
Yes, this is par for the course. And I think what's important about Iran, particularly commenting on Hezbollah's response, is that it just proves what we've all known and what many people want to deny is that Iran is the spider at the center of this web of this so-called axis of resistance. That includes Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Iraqi militias that attacked U.S. troops and killed three U.S. soldiers earlier this year. Iran has organized these militias. And in my estimation, this is a threat that Israel hasn't faced. If we looked at the threat 20 years ago, it was Hezbollah in the north. It was Hamas and in Gaza and problems in the West Bank. Now you have the Houthis launching long-range attacks against Israel, the militias involved. You have all of these groups operating in conjunction. And again, Iran is at the center of this web of terrorism that it's spread throughout the Middle East.
I want to talk about more of the developments that we have seen over the past several days here. A lot to discuss. So I do want to talk about the assassination of Hamas's leader. There are still questions about exactly who is involved. Israel has not claimed responsibility, but with Haniyeh gone, it appears that maybe Sinwar would now call the shots on a potential ceasefire hostage release deal. So I wanted to ask you, what does that potentially change about the dynamic of the situation overall? Does it really change anything?
I think it does change the dynamic. Sinwar, if he hopes to live, look, Israel just showed that it could reach, even though it didn't claim credit, reach deep into the heart of Iran, into the capital, and kill Hamas's chief at a point where security should have been the highest. Sinwar has to be worried. In the same day, they kill Shukar, who not only was involved in that attack that killed the 12 Jersey children, but in 1983, Marine embassy bombings in Beirut that killed over 240 American Marines and soldiers. He has to be fearful. If he wants to live, the best thing he can do is strike a deal, but that's going to be exceedingly difficult given Hamas's demands. Internally, Hamas they want a ceasefire. They want a permanent ceasefire. And that is something the Israelis don't want to agree to, nor should they. The elimination of Hamas has to be the primary objective for the Israelis in Gaza, if they want to survive as a state.
And we do know that the Pentagon said Friday that the U.S. military is going to deploy additional fighters and Navy warships to the Middle East. Is that essentially, just based on your experience, what you know, kind of almost a scare tactic?
Yes, it's meant to be a deterrent. And keep in mind the last time in mid-April when the Iranians launched their attack against the Israelis following an assassination of an Iranian general in Syria, that the U.S., British warships, as well as some countries in the Middle East, provided cover for Israel via their anti-missile systems. So that's being deployed for that reason. The U.S. doesn't want this to spiral into a greater war in the Middle East. I would argue that war has already spiraled as such. Israel is being attacked daily, not just by Hamas, not just by Hezbollah, but by the Iraqi militias, by the Houthis, by the Iranians. But the Biden administration is intent on not letting this spiral out of control. These are, in a way, golden handcuffs for the Israelis. Yes, they provide defense for the Israeli, add to the Israeli air defenses, but in a way, it's restrains the Israelis. The Americans can say, the Biden administration can say, look, we can protect you, but we also can remove this cover if you don't come to a deal with Hamas.
Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was asked about all of this just a few days ago and essentially said that while the U.S. is going to work to prevent a full-scale war from happening, a larger one than we're already seeing, they're going to do everything they can. However, he did say that the U.S. will do anything it can to protect its ally in Israel. So my question is, how involved will the U.S. actually get? You kind of touched on this, but overall, are we going to see soldiers sent out that way? How involved will the U.S. get?
I think if we watch what's happened in the Red Sea with the Houthi attacks on shipping, the U.S. has been reticent. The Biden administration has been very reticent about launching offensive operations. They're doing this, but they're doing it in a way that is just targeting weapons systems. I don't think you'll see U.S. boots on the ground in Israel, in Lebanon. I think what you'll see is providing air defense for the Israelis, shooting down the drones, the cruise missiles, the ballistic missiles that can be launched from Iran. That's where I see the U.S. support. So it's more of a deterrent factor and then a defensive action. The U.S. isn't going to launch airstrikes and target, for instance, Hezbollah leaders. That's just not going to happen. It's not going to target Iranian missile launch sites because the U.S. doesn't want this war to expand. So this deployment of forces is merely to try to tamp down escalating tensions. Now, this is a problem for the Israelis because the Israelis really need to eliminate the threats on several of these fronts. As I mentioned, that noose is tightening around Israel. It needs to get Hamas out of control in Gaza. It needs to degrade Hezbollah to the point where it can't threaten it meaningfully for the next several decades in the north. But it can't do that with the United States restraining it.
Iran. Speaking a little bit more about Iran and the vow of revenge, the threats that have been coming in really over the past several months, but escalating, obviously, in recent days here. As far as what does happen next, we do know that the U.S. has received apparent intel that says that this attack by Iran would be much, much worse than we saw in April. Do we know what the attack could consist of? Because obviously the threats are very vague because Iran isn't going to show its hand just yet. But what do we expect could actually happen here?
Yeah, the last attack, Iran launched cruise missiles, it launched drones, and it launched ballistic missiles at Israel. This was solely from Iran. They launched over 300 weapon systems. Most of it was shot down, but some of those weapon systems did penetrate and strike their targets. I suspect if Iran really wants to hit Israel hard for the assassination of Haniyeh, if it wants to do something meaningful, it will launch its attack with more weapon systems. It could double them, it could triple them, but also in an effort to overwhelm the Israeli. So this is the worst case scenario, right? To overwhelm Israeli and U.S. and British air defenses, Hezbollah can launch its attacks. The Houthis can launch attacks. The Houthis have an extensive arsenal, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles that they can use, and drones that they can use. Hezbollah with rockets, mortars. They also have long and medium range missiles as well as, and other drones as well. And then the Iraqi militias can begin targeting the U.S. and also attempt to launch. This type of attack would overwhelm. This would be if the Iranians really want to make the Israelis pay for the assassination of Haniyeh. That's what they'll do. We may see that, or we may just see what we saw on April 13th, 14th with a limited salvo that's designed to show the world that the Iranians could strike at the Israelis and could strike harder if they wanted to.
We've talked a lot about Hamas, Hezbollah, their capabilities, but the Houthis have also said that they are going to have a military response, a major one, as a result of all of this. How do the capabilities, and you touched on this a little bit, but how do the capabilities of the Houthis compare to those of Hamas and Hezbollah?
The Houthis, I would argue, and several of my colleagues at FDD would argue that the Houthis are the most sophisticated of all the militias in terms of their weapon systems. They have anti-ship ballistic missiles. They have anti-ship cruise missiles. They have drones that they use, unmanned, uncrewed boats, what they call them, that are used to attack ships in the Red Sea. But these ballistic missiles can be launched at Israel as well. They have cruise missiles. They successfully killed an Israeli in Tel Aviv after one of their drones penetrated Israeli airspace undetected. So these are the things. So the Houthis, these weapon systems, and the U.S., by the way, is targeting these systems daily. Remember, I mentioned earlier that the U.S. isn't going after Houthi leadership, military leaders, or key personnel, but they are going after weapon systems. And yet the Houthis are able to launch attacks near daily. They have a seemingly unlimited supply of these weapon systems. The Iranians continue to supply it to the Houthis, and that is how the Houthis can contribute. That is how the Houthis can hurt Israel. A Houthi attack on its own against Israel would not be something that the Israelis are probably going to worry about overly, but in conjunction with what I mentioned earlier, with in conjunction with attack from Hezbollah, from the Iraqi militias, from Iran itself, though that could really cause a problem for the Israelis.
Bill, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Obviously, a lot to discuss here, so we appreciate you breaking it all down for us. Anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
Yeah, I want to reiterate the situation for Israel. I'm deeply concerned with that noose tightening, how the Iranians have organized this over the last 20 years, this web of militias. And if the Israelis really want to stop this, they need to strike harder inside of Iran. I know that sparks fear of a wider war, but the only way to get the Iranians will fight to the last Houthi, the last Palestinian, the last Lebanese, and the last Iraqi. But when they start feeling the effects at home, that's what really frightens and bothers the mullahs in Iran. And so the Israelis have to reconsider. They're treating the symptoms of this disease, but the disease itself is the Iranians and their desire for the destruction of the Israeli state. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right, Bill Raggio, thank you again for being here. We appreciate it.